My name is Murray Rankin. I'm the Minister of Indigenous Relations and Reconciliation for British Columbia. Thank you all for being here at this historic event. I'd like to start us off, if I may, with Mr. George Desjardins, who is an elder with the West Moberly First Nation, for an opening prayer.
I'm going to say the prayer in the language that I grew up speaking. You might not understand it, but like we were told 500 years ago, trust me. Vamos makaki open gisita nan pitskul. Omegwanos kisigaw te kamamo perya. Vamo maigwanos wigano ahatama. Pitspatama sigil. At sigaw tinigan iskakyo ke komanjuasin sinan. Kaya sumakagi pamigos wakoma. Omas iskakyo katmatsa. Ha, sisoma pi tutama. Niya umagesino to maka. Mamsi tago ano man kapag mo mas tamagyan ibas na ginaw magkapinalas ko mo yan ay
Thanks very much, Mr. Desjardins. That's really appreciate you starting us off that way. It's such a pleasure to be here today on the unceded territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations. I get to serve as MC, and I'd like to first then introduce some of my fellow speakers. First, Premier David Eby, Minister Mark Miller, Federal Minister of Crown Indigenous Relations, Chief Justin Napoleon of the Saulteau First Nations, Chief Judy Desjardins of the Blueberry River First Nations, Chief Darlene Hunter of Halfway River First Nations, and Elders Dean Doig and George Desjardins for West Moberly First Nations. I really regret that Chief Trevor McCadahey from Doig River was unable to be here with us today. I'd like to start by acknowledging and thanking the Chief Councillors and members of the Treaty 8 Nations who are attending today. It's lovely to see you. Thank you for making the journey. I also want to thank those who worked so hard to get us to where we are. It's, for reasons I think you'll understand, a very, very important day in the history of our province and our country. I see a lot of familiar faces here today as well. I see former Minister Mo Sahota, who has been an advisor to the Saulteau Nations. Lovely to see you. I see Minister Ravi Kahlon, our Minister of Housing in British Columbia, who is good enough to be here. I see Minister Josie Osborne of Energy, Mines and Low Carbon Innovation, who've come as well. It's just great, and thank you for all of you who are watching online as well. We've all gathered here in Vancouver to celebrate a momentous occasion. The occasion is the completion, after so many years, of the Treaty Land Entitlement Settlement and Lands Agreements with 5 Treaty 8 First Nations. I want to thank everyone in a heartfelt way for all the work that's carried us to this conclusion. And if you'll forgive me, I want to acknowledge the BC staff. We're in our 3rd decade of negotiations, I was reminded. I have my Deputy Minister of Ministry of Indigenous Relations and Reconciliation, Tom McCarthy, who's here. Corey Waters, who's the Chief Negotiator for the North. I also have Dale Morgan of Dawson Creek, who's done an enormous amount of heavy lifting on the provincial side. Ashlyn Schwager, who is also here. And Rosemary Wharton. That's the dream team from British Columbia. I also see some folks I taught at law school, Michael Mladen. I want to shout out to Michael. He's with the federal team, just to show you how ecumenical we truly are here in British Columbia. Without your perseverance, without your trust and courage, we wouldn't be here today. And I want to really thank you very much for what you've all done. At this point, I'd like to introduce Mark Miller, Minister of Crown Indigenous Relations Canada, to say a few words on this historic day. Mark?
Iswell, Tansei, Jahanaji, thank you for welcoming me on the traditional territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh Nations. As Murray, Chief Minister Rankin said, thank you for this welcome to all the chiefs and elders that are speaking today for this really truly historic moment. Chief Judy Desjardins, thanks for being here. Chief Darlene Hunter. Dean Doki, Elders Doki, and George Desjardins, thanks for opening us up in a good way, and we do trust you. We do, as well as Chief Justice Napoleon. It's really, really good to be here at this historic event, and the Premier and what looks like the entirety of the BC Cabinet. Great for you to be here. It shows your commitment. Look, frankly, it's great to be here, and I think if some of your colleagues in other provinces had that same resolve, we'd be a lot farther as a country. So I don't want to make light of it, but I do appreciate the presence because this is a moment where we recognize that for more than 100 years, the Crown failed Doig River, failed Blueberry River, Halfway River, West Moberly, and Saulteau First Nations by not upholding its obligations as a treaty partner. The promise made under Treaty 8 to provide land was broken. Because of the Crown's failure, your communities received less reserve, less land than what was agreed by your nations when you signed the treaty with Canada. We're here today to acknowledge the importance of those historical losses and to resolve land debt owed by the Crown. In doing so, I'm confident that we can approach the future with a renewed and strengthened relationship that was envisioned in the treaty. The settlement of your Treaty Land Entitlement Claims and all the specific claims are critical to addressing past wrongs and advancing reconciliation in a way that respects the rights of First Nations and in a way that holds Canada accountable. You've been pushing for this resolution for your claims for far too long. That said, we celebrate your hard work and the resolution of these claims today. And as I stand here with you, with our partner in the Crown, I reaffirm Canada's commitment to continue working alongside your communities to support your self-determination. Cela fait trop longtemps que vos revendications auraient dû être réglées. Cela dit, nous célébrons aujourd'hui votre travail acharné et le règlement de ces revendications de longue date. Alors que je suis ici avec vous aujourd'hui, je réaffirme l'engagement avec notre partenaire des provinces, l'engagement du Canada à continuer de travailler avec vous, à vos côtés, avec vos communautés pour soutenir votre droit inhérent à l'autodétermination. This is an important step in creating new opportunities for communities and advancing your ongoing work to enhance self-determination, enhance self-sufficiency. Under the settlements, Canada is compensating the First Nations for more, as I mentioned earlier, more than 100 years of economic loss that resulted from treaty land entitlement shortfalls. The province of British Columbia is remedying the land debt by committing to provide almost 115,000 acres of provincial crown to the First Nations. And I want to take a particular moment to highlight the fact that BC, as the holder of the lands of the Crown, has been at the table to put land back into communities. And well, obviously, there can always be some criticism. BC has been with Canada every step of the way to make sure that more than money is on the table and has actually been instrumental in getting land back into Indigenous communities. And I think provincial partners, territorial partners can learn from that because we all have a lot to learn from what has been to now a broken relationship. We know, again, I want to acknowledge that this process hasn't been fast and hasn't been fast enough. The federal government over the last year has had record disbursements and record settlements of claims, and we hope to achieve that this year. But it is important to recognize that as we look at the implementation, and again, BC is leading the way here, of the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, these processes actually reflect the legislative intent and spirit of UNDRIP, both with Canada and both with the province. And to that, there requires reform to both the speed and the way we do business with our equals in First Nations. So to that end, for Canada's part, we have launched, at least last fall in 2022, a process whereby we have undertaken to reform the specific claims process, look at the cap that exists with it. These are very technical in nature, but those things continue to impede the process by which we resolve these claims in a good way. I don't know the outcome of that because it really is in the hands of working groups, specialized working groups of Indigenous peoples, but we have undertaken to do so because we know, really looking at the current model today, that it clearly is not working. L'objectif ultime de ce processus est la création d'un centre indépendant de règlement des revendications particulières qui facilite et accélère le règlement des revendications particulières et instaure une plus grande confiance dans la procédure, ce que les Premières Nations nous demandent de faire depuis des décennies. Today, again, is a new day for our treaty relationship, and I really look forward to our future collaboration. Ekuse, Hayachka, merci, thank you.
Thanks very much. I really appreciate that. And I can say on behalf of British Columbia that the partnership with Canada that got us to this point turns in large measure on the commitment of this government. And I'm grateful to you, Mark, for being here. You commented on the fact that we had such a large cabinet contingent here, but I'm neglected to mention that I forgot one of my colleagues who I didn't see in the room. Minister Brenda Bailey, the Minister for what we call JEDI, Jobs, Economic Development and Innovation. Thank you so much for being here. I'd now like to invite our Premier, David Eby, to say a few words.
Thank you so much, Murray. It's an honor to be here on the territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people. Thank you so much to the chiefs, the councillors, the members from the Treaty 8 Nations who made the trek to be here with us today. Thank you for being here. In January, I had the honor of meeting with Treaty 8 chiefs, Chief Desjardins, Chief Napoleon, Chief Hunter, Chief Makadahe. I'm honored to continue this work with you. This is critically important work. Thank you so much, Minister Miller, for joining us and for your work and your team's work on this file on behalf of the federal government. On the long road to reconciliation with First Nations in our province, today is a huge milestone for 5 of the Treaty 8 First Nations, for the province of BC, for the federal government, for all of us who believe the future lies in rights, respect, and reconciliation. We have seen in this province what doesn't work. Endless court battles, transactional relationships, short-term arrangements. We can't afford to go back to that approach. We need long-term solutions in this province. But we can always work for making things right. And today with our partners, we're able to do that, and in the process, create opportunity not just for the Treaty 8 Nations, but for the entire northeast of our province. Honoring Treaty 8 is a key part of our work to advance reconciliation in the Peace River area and reconnect these 5 nations with their land. By settling these Treaty Land Entitlement specific claims, we're restoring the rightful amount of land that was promised under the treaty, and all of the benefits that should have flowed at the time to those nations. These agreements are a critical step forward. They're going to provide greater stability and predictability for everyone in the region. They will create economic and business opportunities for the entire Northeast, lifting the boats, a rising tide that's going to lift the boats of everybody in the region. This is an agreement that will address a 100-year-long injustice. An injustice committed when nations were cheated out of thousands of acres of land that they were entitled to. A century has passed. It's more than past time to make this right. We have to build a future in BC that's based on respect, reconciliation, and act with the honor of the Crown. That's our government's focus, and we're going to continue working with First Nations, with our federal counterpart, to ensure the land that we promise, the commitments we make, are honored. I'm confident that together we can make real progress on land, water, and resource stewardship together in Treaty 8 territory and well beyond. Trust is earned and not given. And today and every day, I'm committed to earning your trust and the trust of all British Columbians by working with my team and all of us building on the work we've already done together. whether it's protecting caribou with the Saulteau and West Moberly First Nations, developing a partnership approach to land, water, and resource stewardship with the Blueberry River First Nations Implementation Agreement, co-developing a set of initiatives with Treaty 8 nations for how we manage land and resources together in partnership, planning, developing, and implementing an urban reserve in Fort St. John with Doig River First Nation, developing the Zanuna Conservancy with the Halfway River First Nation, and so much more. Our work together shows that a stronger, more inclusive BC is not only possible, it's within reach. Where opportunity has grown with, by, and for First Nations, opportunity that benefits everyone in the province, where we work together to protect the land, water, and air for future generations that we all rely on. And where prosperity is shared more widely and more fairly, today we are one step closer. Thank you so much for your work, and thank you for including me to be part of this historic day. Congratulations, everybody who was involved.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you, Premier, for your leadership and your commitment to reconciliation in not only the Northeast but across our province. It really is wonderful to see the changes that have occurred. I'd now like to call on our first speaker from the Treaty 8 nations involved, Chief Napoleon of Saulteau First Nation. If you could please welcome your words.
Hello, everyone. I'd like to acknowledge the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations and their land that we're on today. Thank you for attending this important and historic event. I'd like to take a few minutes to give some background on this historic signing. Treaty 8 was signed between Canada and the participating nations over 100 years ago. Our people have always honored the treaty, our ancestors, our elders, and now our young people. We put our faith in our treaty. It is meaningful to us. It matters. Saulteau First Nations entered into our treaty with Canada on the basis of good faith. Our elders were intent on keeping their word and expecting the government to do the same. Sadly, that is not what happened. For many decades, the federal and provincial governments ignored our treaty, and they broke many of the promises that were made between us. Amongst the broken promises was a treaty commitment to set aside 128 acres per person as an Indian reserve for each nation. The government shortchanged us when it came to surveying our reserve land, and the reserve lands of our fellow Treaty 8 nations as well. Our shortfall was in the thousands of acres. We lost access to our lands, our way of life, and the ability to generate wealth on our lands as we deem necessary. At the same time, cumulative impacts of industry further eroded our ability to utilize our treaty lands according to our historic way of life. At the time, the Provincial Land Act allowed settlers to settle for free on up to 320 acres, while Indigenous persons could not move onto any non-reserve land at all. Provincial law openly legislated this discriminatory policy. Not only was it discriminatory, but it also allowed settlers on some of the land that we were shortchanged on. These weren't isolated incidents. We can see that clearly in the case that Blueberry River won last year. It was because of this unjustness that our elders set out to correct this wrongdoing. They approached government expecting that they would honor their word, but doors were shut in their face. By the mid-1990s, Aboriginal law had advanced to the point that my predecessors thought that they could file a claim in court, which they did in 1997. Government initially opposed our claim, but finally in 2006, Canada recognized the wrong and accepted our claim negotiation. We negotiated on and off for years. Further negotiations ensued with the province, and in total, after 17 long years of discussion, we finally resolved all of the issues related to compensation, title to our lands, and taxation. We are very relieved and happy to have reached an agreement and to be here to share it with you today. It's taken us nearly 25 years to resolve these issues with government. Provincially, this would not have been possible without the change in direction that came with the election of the Horgan government. Premier Horgan promised us that our voices would be heard. We were skeptical, but the negotiations around other issues persuaded us that this government was different and they wanted to resolve these issues. I'd like to say that I see Minister Kahlon in the audience today, and I'd like to acknowledge him because he led the provincial negotiations on protecting our caribou herds. I want to thank him for his efforts, for the time that he took away from his other work and his personal obligations to demonstrate to us that government sincerely wanted to hold up their word. His actions gave us faith that we would make progress towards this historic day. And I want to thank Minister Rankin, who every time we had concerns would pick up the phone or meet with us in Victoria to assure us that this day would come, and it has, because Minister Rankin and Deputies McCarthy and Millar were true to their word. And on behalf of our nation, Minister Rankin, I would want to express our gratitude for your honesty, your integrity, and your willingness to work with us on tough, long-standing issues. I would like to invite you to come and celebrate with us at our nation later this year. Premier Eby, I know that as Attorney General, you are supportive of our cause, but I want to thank you for your steadfastness. You had the courage not to appeal the Blueberry case, and because of that decision, we were able to arrive at a settlement through dialogue. A settlement that works towards healing our land from the cumulative effects of environmental degradation and excessive industrial development. In your short time as Premier, your even-handed approach has worked toward protecting the environment in Treaty 8 territory while promoting economic prosperity, as well as promoting economic opportunities for First Nations across the province, as noted with the Haisla LNG announcement. It is quite impressive, Mr. Premier, that in a matter of months you have championed the causes of environmental, economic, and social reconciliation. Your commitment to reconciliation is refreshing, and it instills hope for the future. Federally, I would like to acknowledge and thank Minister Miller. Minister, you prioritized this settlement. You understood the wrong, and you worked with us to amend the issues. The federal cash contribution is significant, and its impacts are going to be life-changing for this and future generations. We thank you for your effort, determination, and sincerity. And I would ask that you convey our gratitude to the Prime Minister, as it was his government that shifted policy away from a litigious approach to one centered on consensus and relationship building. I have to give my sincerest gratitude to all the elders, those past and those that are still with us, to my prior leadership, some of whom I am honored to have in this very room with me today. If it wasn't for their efforts and dedication, we would not be here today. Lastly, I have to give a big thanks to James Hickling and the Havlik Group, who've been with Saulteau through all of this, for your years of effort on this great cause. Let's see. In closing, I'd like to say that settlements like the one we are announcing today are a win for all people, Indigenous and non-Indigenous, in BC, in Canada, and in the Peace region. This settlement will provide a lasting legacy and long-term economic stimulus for the Peace region. We are all neighbors living together in our communities. We all prosper with the economic stimulation that comes from this settlement. Broken treaty promises have lasting negative impacts and cause untold harms to people and communities. Everyone suffers, Indigenous and non-Indigenous. But these historic announcements bring us together. They bring us further down the path of reconciliation with the government. They help us set aside bigotry and racism, and they allow us to work together to build a stronger, fairer, and more prosperous Canada. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Chief Napoleon. That was really moving. And thank you for putting this in the broader historic context, reminding us of litigation and reminding us of the path forward that has achieved what we've achieved today together. And thank you for acknowledging the elders who were so critical in the former leadership that got us to where we are. I'd now like to invite Chief Judy Desjardins of the Blueberry River First Nations to say a few words.
Jahanandri. Good day. Thank you, Minister Rankin, Premier Eby, Minister Miller. It's been a long road for my people. 8 terms of Chief and Council, 25 years. In that time frame, we lost a lot of honorable elders who contributed greatly with their wisdom and knowledge to this settlement. I wish they could be here today. Without them and the government that had a hand in bringing us to this success, we wouldn't be here today. I want to thank you for the true path to reconciliation and taking the first step into this moment and trying to find that path as government officials with us as First Nations people, and given the recognition that it's been a long time coming. Your sincerity is greatly appreciated and honorable, as trust is a big thing. As you said, it's earned and not given. On behalf of my community, our elders, the ancestors before us, the leadership before me, who came before us to mark this important step toward true reconciliation, it's a great honor. True reconciliation is taking that first step together. And Premier Eby, you showed us as leadership in the short time you've been part of, you became Premier, that you're willing to do that, and I greatly appreciate it. As well as Minister Rankin and Mark Miller. This Treaty Land Entitlement Settlement has been almost 25 years in the making. The unfortunate truth is that the reason for the settlement in the first place is a result of our people being deprived of the use and benefit of thousands of acres of land owed to them under Treaty 8. Our treaty is more than 100 years old. Many promises are woven into that treaty, and not all have been followed. Canada agreed to set aside an amount of land based on the number of our members, while our people were away practicing our traditional and cultural ways of life, which consisted of moving around our territory. Canada did account. Well, that was miscounted. As a result, the government did not set aside the amount of reserve land promised to our ancestors under the treaty. Our ancestors and elders recognized there was a shortfall. So they voiced their concerns and stood up for our rights as First Nations people to ensure their treaty promise was fulfilled. It has been a long road, and we have overcome many significant challenges and obstacles through almost 2 decades of negotiations to reach a fair treaty land entitlement settlement. But we got here. We owe our gratitude to our honorable elders, past leaders, who without their wisdom and knowledge, we wouldn't be here today. Those that left us stood up for us and for the future generations. We thank them from the bottom of our hearts, and everyone who had a hand in getting here. I also want to acknowledge Canada and BC. We still have a long way to go. However, in the spirit of truth and reconciliation, we are seeing more alignment between the government and First Nations in this country. We are seeing real action. I want to thank our legal team. It's been a long road. James, Simon, and the rest of our legal team that had a hand in it. It's been a long road, but through perseverance and many changes in leadership, we got here. Thank you, guys. We are setting a path for the next 7 generations to be able to continue our traditional and cultural way of life on the land of our ancestors were from, which they called Sunechike. In our land, our ancestors were from. In our language, this means the place where happiness dwells. Our elders and ancestors called it this because this is where they lived freely off the land. They lived together in unity. They shared, communicated, had an understanding of one another and the land. They lived a simple life, rich in values and culture. In short, they were happy and healthy. They took care of the land, and the land took care of them. We look forward to continuing our way of life for many generations to come. Mucho sanala.
Thanks very, very much, Chief Desjardins. And the note of sadness is one that I think we all acknowledge when we think about the elders who are no longer here, who worked so hard over so many years to get us to here. So that note of sadness is must be acknowledged. And speaking of acknowledgement, it's not very often people say nice things about lawyers, so I had to acknowledge that as well. James Tate, Simon, James Hickling, it deserves to be said, and I'm glad that you, Chief, put that out there. Now I'd like to call upon Chief Hunter to say a few words.
Hi, everyone. My speech is not as long as these two. No. I'd just like to say I'd like to thank Minister and Evie Rankin for helping us get through all this. And I'd just like to say that the Halfway's ancestors adhered to the treaty in 1914, but did not receive their full land entitlement promised by the treaty. Under the leadership of the late Chief Bernie Medici, Halfway filed a specific claim in 1995 for those lands. Canada did not start negotiating the specific claim with Halfway until December 2002. Councillors Joyce Akla, who's here with me today, and Councillor Maisie Medici, who couldn't be here because she's not feeling well, were at that first negotiation meeting. And now, 21 years later, and 99 years after Halfway adhered to the treaty, Canada and BC have finally resolved this outstanding treaty promise with our community. I want to acknowledge all the elders and the community members that have passed and who never got to see this day finally come. I'm here today in honor of them. This settlement will benefit not only the current generation of Halfway members, but also the generations to come. Through the lands provided under this settlement, Halfway has protected 2 key portions of this territory, Sanana and Chowati. Community members will continue to camp there, practice their traditions, and teach the youth our culture. Halfway has also established a community trust so that the financial compensation provided under the settlement will be preserved and grown for the benefit of all community members. This trust is governed by trustees chosen by the main family groups at Halfway. Over time, this trust will ensure Halfway has the resources to care for its members and to follow the dreams members have for themselves and our community. We have waited a very long time for today, but it has finally come, and it is a good day. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Chief Hunter, and I did the arithmetic, 1995 till now, that sounds a lot like 28 years of hard work, and then the work before it as well. And I'm pleased that you talked about the importance of the cultural lands that have been set aside for future generations, and the notion of a trust lets people know that this is a long-term proposition that'll help people into the future. So thank you for putting that on the table as well. I mentioned that Chief Trevor McCatahay from Doig River was unable to be here. So our concluding speakers will be from West Moberly First Nation, Elders Dean Doki and George Desjardins again. Say a few words. Thank you.
He's trying to make me stand alone. I won't let him. Better get the sweetgrass, buddy. This is really do a cleanse here. Thank you very much. It's an honor to be here for Chief Roland. Roland couldn't be here because he has a medical condition. They just can't make it, and you know, as it were, the Creator sent us, and we are here. I want to talk more about the pre-1995 exception of the TLE process. I was in university, and the chiefs had called me back home and said, "Come back home. We need you here to fix Treaty 8." I'd already been in the Nations probably about 6 to 8 years at that point in time. But it was an opportune time for me after completing my degree. But it was an important part of my life in terms of the treaty process. I grew up in the treaty process. I knew the treaty from the elders more than anything. But in that process, I was instructed to restructure Treaty 8 completely, which I did. And we recruited this one young man out of Ottawa who was on fire and in passion for the treaty process. And he knew a lot of things about it. And in fact, he was so on fire that I remember one day he chased one of his associates out of the office and backed him up in the back part of the building where the manager was living. His name's Peter Havlick. And this was prior to the exception of the 1995 of the TLE. Sometime later, he built our TAR office at Treaty 8, but he also brought 3 specific claims to us. One was the TLE. And I remember he walked in, he said, "This is big, guys. You have to look at this." So the executive team of the day looked at it and said, "Yeah, we need to continue this journey. We have to. We need to assert and implement our treaty." That was the focus for 5 years straight. Now, other people have joined that path, and certainly over the years. And I remember, as I looked at the whole thing, what our elders had told us, that always keep the treaty before you. It will protect you. It will give you everything you need. It is the strength. And I left shortly after that and did other things with other nations. But it kept returning into my life because I would go back to the community and it would be there. TLE would be there. It was going slower, faster. And it was a long process. It was. For me, it was from about 1993. And given that, in my reflection and the clarity of the strength of the treaty, we now know the significant and the incredible journey that we've gone through with this. Yes, we've lost a lot of people. You know, my father was the chief of my nation, and certainly he didn't see the day. My mother's still alive. She's 90, has dementia, and probably won't enjoy the benefits of it, and certainly won't see the benefits of it. But I got to see it. During those years that I've been gone with the nations for a better part of 42 years, I've looked at it and said, will I ever see it in my lifetime? I've even gone to my council and said, I think TLE is cursed. I think TLE is a myth. I think I will not see it in my life. But here it is before us. What it tells me the significance of the treaty, and always has been, what our forefathers gave us was a gift of life for a long, long time. The TLE settlement signifies the strength of our treaty, but it also gives us the hope that other processes will be a lot sooner than later. What I do remember about the treaty and its significance is this, is our future. We will teach our children exactly what it means. We will teach them the strength of the treaty. We will give them what they need in order to prosper. That's what the treaty is for. Because the treaty is, as long as the sun shines, as long as the grass grows, as long as the rivers flow. And that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Dean. Ditto. "25 years ago or so, I was the chief of West Moberly First Nations. And when I read the treaty, there was a few questions that came to me. Is this what the treaty was? Is that all of it? And thanks to the individual that Dean mentioned, Peter Havlick, we did an in-depth study of what the spirit and intent of Treaty Number 8 was. And we found out a few things. And through the years, the courts have also said the words in the treaty should not be interpreted strictly as written, but should be interpreted in the understanding of the Indians at the time of signing. And that's what I thought was the treaty. And then with the Grand Council of Treaty Number 8, for a number of years, I was the Vice Grand Chief of Treaty Number 8. We found out that not everything was written in the treaty. There were some things that were left out. And there were some things too that still may need to be defined. But that's a whole nother argument which I'm ready to fight anytime. Anyways, so based on that, I sat down one day on behalf of the people of West Moberly First Nations, and I wrote a letter to the Prime Minister of Canada. And in that letter, I simply said, in accordance to the interpretation of the treaty that we have, called Treaty Number 8, you owe us 128 acres of land per person. But it is our choice whether we want to claim that land as land in 128 per person or 116 severality. Well, if you take the numbers from today and multiply it, the country of Canada owes West Moberly First Nations some 28,000 acres. Then I drew a line on a map and said, this is where we will take those 28,000 acres. Thank you very much. And I sent the letter off. We got a response in about a month, and it started a process. In the meantime, I had told my people, and especially the children of the day, which is now the council that we have today. I told them, I'm going to start a fight. You guys pay attention because you're going to have to finish it. I may not see the end of it, I told them. And this is where he stole my thunder. Because here I am. I get to see the end of this. At least this go around anyways. We still have lots to fight about. We always will. And I'm glad I got to see the end of this because I never ever thought I was going to. I mean, After all, it did take roughly 100 years just to settle one part of the argument in regards to what the treaty promised. So I didn't expect 25 years would do it. So anyways, I'd like to thank everybody that got involved. The province, all the ministers from the provinces or province, and the Prime Minister and all the ministers under him or her at the time, or no, we don't have a her, eh? Too many pronouns nowadays. So anyways, yeah, just as an elder of West Moberly First Nations, I'd just like to say thank you very much. And we'll see you again because our fight ain't over yet.
Well, thanks for acknowledging we've settled part of the argument today. That's a good start. It's so many things need to be said. I thought I'd just talk a little bit about the land amount because I was trying to get my head around what it means. Apparently, there is 109,385 acres that would be available under the additional lands and the shortfall lands. We can explain that later, but the shortfall lands were restored, lands that should have been provided initially, as you've heard, and then additional lands the province have made available to be acquired by the nation and which could, at their instance, be put into additions to reserve if that is what they wish to do. But 109,385 acres, I had no idea what that meant. So, of course, I went to Wikipedia to figure it out. And I'm told that that amounts to 443 square kilometers. And I said, I still don't know what that looks like. So I went and found out that the city of Vancouver is 114 square kilometers and the city of Surrey is 316. So you add that together and you get 430 kilometers, square kilometers, and the amount of land at issue is 443 square kilometers. I thought that would give people a bit of a sense of the land component of this settlement. I think the sentiments you've heard today, I'd like to echo very briefly, that this is about righting an injustice. It's also about restoring what was promised under the treaty. But it will bring prosperity to all of the northeast of British Columbia. Indigenous and non-Indigenous communities will benefit from what we have done and what should have been done so many years ago, as you've heard. We've been collaborating, and the Premier made this point, with Treaty 8 nations on a number of other agreements and initiatives to address the cumulative effects of economic development in northeast British Columbia. We're very proud of the work we did with Chief Desjardins, settling the Blueberry River's lawsuit and creating the Blueberry River First Nations Implementation Agreement. And we finalized a consensus document co-developed with 6 Treaty 8 nations after that. And these agreements, like the ones we're settling today, are a framework to approach economic reconciliation and to create a shared path forward for all of us. So honoring Treaty 8, very important part of our work in British Columbia and Canada in advancing reconciliation, but it's work that everyone in northeast British Columbia, I think, will benefit from. Together, our teams worked really hard, and we got it done. We got it done after much too long. But as others have said, we've built relationships that will endure. I know will endure, and it's based on what the Premier said, respect, rights, and reconciliation. That, I think, is where we're going. There's lots more work to do. We've been reminded, and we're going to do that work together. But we're going to do so in a different way. We're going to do so with the relationship that we forged together. So with that said, I'd like to turn over the mic to our media relations team for any questions that might be asked by the media. I think, Jimmy Smith, you're going to take it from here.
Thank you, Minister, and thanks everyone for joining us. Before we conclude our event today, we do have several members of the media online, and we want to give them the opportunity to ask a question. If there are members of the media online who would like to ask a question, please press *1 to enter the queue, and we're just going to give them a moment to allow some time for that to happen.
It was also clear that
Our first question is going to come from Catherine Garrett from Global News. Go ahead, Catherine.
Hello, this is actually her colleague, Alex Buster. The question that we have here is, what is the cash settlement from the federal government, and how is it being divided between the 5 First Nations involved in this treaty?
Yep, thank you for the question. I would note that the global amount was not made proactively public. It is something that is available in public disclosure based on parliamentary filings. But the global sum is $800 million. This is, and I do want to put a bit of context into this, because this was not this was withheld for proactive reasons. The first one being is there is extreme reticence, and perhaps one of the chiefs wants to speak about this, in communities about the effect of a cash influx and the stigma that occurs with the perceived quote unquote windfall that this could be for communities. And let me say this. This isn't a windfall. It's not free money. It's a bill that's gone unpaid for over 100 years by the Government of Canada. So there's any stigma and prejudice to be leveled on anyone, it's on the Government of Canada and not on our treaty partners whose obligations we've disrespected for 100 years. The treaty documents are constitutional documents, and Canada has not respected them from day one. And so these are bills long past due that are due to the people, and they will be game changers for economic development in the North, as well as for the next generations. And I really do appreciate the words from the elders to that effect, because these could be game changers. But it remains that today there's still a lot of stigma that can be leveled on communities based on financial compensation of this nature, because of the ignorance that exists in the wider segment of society with respect to the nature of these claims globally. The breakdown in the communities we're not going to disclose today, but we do have a duty to Canadians and our financial obligations that exist as part of our budgetary process to disclose the global amount, which is $800 million. But again, I think the context of this is very, very important to frame, particularly as this is disclosed to the wider public. Thank you.
Do you have a follow-up, Catherine?
Thank you.
Go ahead, Catherine, if you have a follow-up. Okay, well, we're going to move on to Les Lane from Victoria Times. Go ahead, Les.
Oh, thanks. I understand your concerns about the stigma, but what's the provincial contribution? Can that be disclosed under the same framework you just announced for the federal one?
Thanks, Les. The provincial contribution was land, and as I indicated earlier, there were 2 categories of land. There was the land that initially should have been provided and wasn't, and you've heard about that. And there were additional lands that were made available that could be purchased or made available through that kind of process that would be converted from Crown land into lands that would be in fee simple, and those lands could be added to reserve under the federal process called additions to reserve, but at the instance of the First Nation. I've indicated the number of hectares at issue, or let me use the old-fashioned acres, 109,385 acres, or 443 kilometers squared in both categories of land. But the province was not responsible for cash. The province was responsible for land.
Follow-up, Les.
And under the general heading of co-management, with a lot more First Nations, Indigenous dealing in on decision-making, can that be accomplished under the current sort of government-to-government relationships, or do you have to construct a whole new entity to regulate development on northeastern BC now?
The Treaty 8 nations were in various ways involved with the settlement of the Yahé decision brought by former Chief Yahé of the Blueberry River First Nations. And then that led to a consensus document engaging the other Treaty 8 nations. Under those agreements, there's considerable involvement in the planning, land use planning in the Northeast. And there's a fund called the Restoration Fund, $500 million that would be made available for just that, restoration of the lands affected by industrial activities. I think it's fair to say that as a result of our negotiations, there's an entirely new level of involvement among the First Nations. and local governments and BC and all of the regulatory agencies are engaging in an entirely different way going forward.
Our next question is going to come from Amelia Macour from Radio-Canada. Go ahead, Amelia.
Thank you. My question is in French and it's for Minister Miller. La restitution des terres a été quelque chose que vous avez promis dès votre assermentation. Est-ce que vous pouvez juste nous expliquer pourquoi est-ce que c'était important pour vous d'aller de l'avant avec cette annonce aujourd'hui?
Question fort importante parce qu'on sait que, circonstances normales, la consigne de base, puis c'est la formule qui a été employée par le passé, c'était d'avoir une restitution sous forme de compensation financière. Alors, sachant évidemment le côté émotionnel, identitaire des terres, pour plusieurs Premières Nations, la vaste majorité, l'argent, une compensation financière ne peut pas remplacer la destitution puis l'enlèvement des terres qui a été fait de façon historique, systémique depuis l'arrivée des Européens à ce qui est aujourd'hui le Canada. Par le passé, on avait une formule assez casée, assez stricte, selon laquelle il y avait simplement une compensation financière. Alors, sachant qu'il y a des complexités qui existent au sein de la Constitution qui font en sorte que les terres de la couronne sont divisées en deux, soit des terres de la couronne qui sont détenues par la province et d'autres par la couronne dite fédérale. Ça devient très complexe quand c'est seulement un grief qui existe et qui est institué en cours contre le gouvernement du Canada. Alors, en ce qui a trait à des violations de traités et d'autres, impossible d'avoir une rectification qui est juste et à la hauteur des attentes des Premières Nations si des terres ne sont pas mises sur la table. Et impossible d'avoir une réconciliation qui peut être, qui ne serait simplement que quasi complète si on ne mettait que de l'argent sur la table. Évidemment, à travers le Canada, certaines provinces se comportent mieux que d'autres, puis le Canada n'est pas nécessairement le premier de classe non plus. Mais ce que je peux dire aujourd'hui, c'est que la Colombie-Britannique a mis des terres sur la table. Et puis, c'est une leçon qui pourrait être apprise par les autres provinces, les autres territoires. Il y en a qui en mettent sur la table. Il y en a d'autres qui même s'il y a des arrangements, on a parlé beaucoup dans la presse aujourd'hui, ces dernières semaines, sur la loi sur les transferts des ressources naturelles dans les provinces des prairies. Mais dans ces projets de loi-là, dans ces lois-là qui existent depuis 1930, qui ont été exécutées sur le dos des peuples autochtones, il y a des obligations assez arrêtées envers les peuples autochtones en ce qui a trait à la restitution de terres. Et celles-ci ne sont pas respectées. Alors, il y a encore des exemples aujourd'hui de provinces qui ne sont pas à l'appel en ce qui a trait à la restitution de terres et qui violent leurs obligations sur ces obligations qui existent et qui existent depuis les années 1930 et même avant. Donc, c'est très important, c'est émotif, c'est identitaire pour les peuples autochtones de mettre des terres sur la table et pas uniquement une compensation financière. Et sachez qu'il y a beaucoup de travail qui reste à faire, mais aujourd'hui, c'est un bel exemple d'une province qui est à la table de négociation, qui veut bien mettre des terres qui sont dites de la responsabilité de la couronne provinciale. Et je pense que c'est tout à la hauteur de la Colombie-Britannique.
Amelia, do you have a follow-up question?
Oui, merci beaucoup, ministre Miller. Ma prochaine question, c'est pour le ministre Rankin. Justement, vu que c'est la Colombie-Britannique qui met des terres sur la table, pouvez-vous nous expliquer pourquoi vous en êtes venu à cela et combien de terres aussi? Comment est-ce que ça va fonctionner? Combien de terres vont être redistribuées aux 5 Premières Nations?
Merci. Et juste pour ajouter, il s'agit, nous sommes très fiers, nous autres, en Colombie-Britannique, de faire une contribution de la terre gérée par la couronne provinciale. Donc, pour nous autres, ça s'agit d'un partenariat avec le gouvernement fédéral parce que je crois que c'est nécessaire parce que les aînés des autochtones, des communautés autochtones vont vous dire que ce qui est important, c'est la terre. C'est ça l'avenir de leur peuple et nous autres sommes là pour les aider à cet égard-là.
And that concludes our media Q&A portion of the event. At this time, we'd like to invite all the speakers back up for a group photo to